It's winter time, and I've just bought a new Japanese maple tree. It's a good time to plant these things, either bare root or in a pot whilst they're dormant in the middle of winter. It's a great time to plant your deciduous trees and plants. An important part of planting a tree is the preparation. Actually, if you were to just take it out of a pot and plonk it in a small hole, that would be a pretty short job. It takes just as long actually to do all the proper preparation, which we'll have a look at now. It's easy to think that a tree might be symmetrical above and below the ground. That is, that the roots might go down as deep as the tree is tall. Actually, that's not the case at all. Most trees only grow roots along a foot underneath the soil, so that their roots go out very, very wide, at least as wide as the canopy, and perhaps even wider. They like to grow along the top of the soil because the oxygen is richer there, and the soil is very poor and oxygen poor in nutrients and poor in oxygen the further down you go. So when you're planting a tree, this means that the important way in which roots must grow is outwards. So it's more important to dig your hole wider than the pot, rather than trying to go deeper and deeper. Your hole should be at least twice as wide as the pot, if not wider, and you can angle the sides out at a 45-degree angle to make it even wider. It should only needs to be about as deep as the pot. When you're putting the plant then in the hole, put a little bit of fresh, improved soil underneath the plant and all around to the sides of it. You should put the plants, most plants you prefer to be slightly above the soil level. We call that slightly proud of the soil. And in any case, the fresh, new, loose soil will settle over time, so it will come back down. Most plants like to be just above the soil rather than to be below the natural soil level. When you have freshly loose soil, then when the plant begins to grow, then the roots can easily grow out and flourish and get more nutrients. And as you've made your hole much wider, then the roots can go out sideways, which is the way they want to grow. Do this and you'll have a very happy plant. Never miss an opportunity to improve the soil. That's probably the most important possible thing you can do as a gardener in your garden, is to improve the soil. I'm planting a tree here. The soil's already quite good, but I've got some, this is compost out of my compost heap. You'll see that's full of life. There's worms and all sorts of little microbes, etc. So even though I'm just putting a small bucket in into a big hole, but this is really like a tonic. Actually, it's putting all sorts of microbes and life into the soil. This I use, the soil here in Australia tends to dry out a lot. This is peat moss, so I'm just mixing a little bit of that in. It lets the soil hold moisture more. If you have a very clayey soil, there's no need to put that in, but the soil in this little spot is a little bit sandy, so I'll put some of that in, and it holds the moisture. I buy big plastic bags of this peat moss. Last thing I'm putting in is some gypsum, because below the soil, so I've dug down about a foot, and then below that there's actually a layer of clay. So this I'll put this right at the bottom, just a little bit of gypsum to break up the clay layer below. Here's what I'm talking about in the hole here. If you look on the sides of the hole, see how dark and black the soil is. That's nice improved soil. I've been improving it for years and years. So that's nice and black. Where I've dug down to the bottom here, see this orangey stuff here? Now that is clay. You can see, just like modeling clay. When you get clay, it's not friable like the other soil there. It's made a little ball there, so that's really quite clay underneath. So there's a clay substrate with quite a nice soil there. So I'll throw the gypsum in just to help to break up that clay layer. I wouldn't dig any much further into that clay, otherwise you're just creating a pot that is going to hold the moisture. It'll get wet and the roots will rot on it. So what I'll do here is just add some gypsum. You can be pretty generous with gypsum. I'm putting it right at that bottom layer where the clay was. It must have been in this pot for quite some time, and you can see the roots have grown up against the side of the pot. So before we plant, just going to try and gently loosen those out so that they... Remember I said that roots like to go sideways? Well, these roots would have gone sideways, but they hit the side of the pot. So I'm loosening them out so that they will go sideways once we plant it in the hole. Okay, the tree's now in the hole. The level of the top of the soil should be at the slightly above the normal ground level, because it's all going to settle with the soil that you've disrupted. You don't want the top of this to be lower. There's no advantage in that. In fact, these roots here are used to getting oxygen from the top of the soil, so if you bury them down, they won't like that. You note this one has been grafted, so of course you certainly don't want to bury the graft. So if you're going to put more soil in there, certainly keep it underneath the graft, but I wouldn't. Keep this up nice and high. Most plants like to be planted slightly proud of their soil. Let's mix our improvers with the other soil that was already here. Mix all that up and then just fill it in around the roots of this plant. Now remember, that's where the pot is. See, my hole is at least double that on the side. So this is all going to be loose new soil that I put in, and the roots will grow easily out into that in the first season. It'll make it a lot easier for it to take off. Here's our tree. Last thing, I'll just spread back the mulch leaf litter that I took away at the beginning. Just put it back in around there. That mulch will stop the evaporation from the soil, so You need water to come from rain and irrigation, but you also need to stop it from evaporating as much as possible. So the mulch there sits on top of the brown drip pipe. Okay, the tree is in and planted. There's two things you need to do before you finish. I've prepared a watering can of seaweed solution, and you just want to water that in. It's important to water so that the soil settles and you don't get air pockets and uneven things in the soil. And the seaweed, you can see the colour there, the seaweed solution sort of helps the roots to grow. So put that on just to get those roots moving. I usually give these things a bit of a trim, just so that when they come out next year they haven't got quite as many leaves to feed and quite the height to push the water up. So I'm just going to take that little trim, so it's about a foot I'm taking off. This is about a 6-foot tree, and I've just taken a foot off the top, that part there. So that's all, just a simple trim. The roots have been in that pot. They haven't been able to develop as well as they should. They possibly were damaged when we planted them. Just give the plant a little bit of a trim so that there's less leaves and things on top for the roots to deal with, and to allow the roots to really take off nicely in the first year, which is what the main aim is. Well, look at this tree now. What a cracker. It's barely 9 months old. We're now in autumn, as you can see. It's putting on an amazing display for us in its very first year. I think there's an Asian proverb that says that you really understand life when you plant a tree that you know you won't be able to sit under. I think there's a good deal of truth in that. Do something good for yourself, for your garden, for the animals in the garden, and for future generations of gardeners. Go out there and plant a tree, bring a bit of long-term joy into your garden.